Thank you, Rory. And I'm so excited to see Ryan and Subrashi and Mark again. Well, I didn't see you last time, we just talked, but here we are. And we have some provocative questions that we want to talk about when it comes to continuous learning. As I mentioned previously, I'm like, voraciously reading Teresa's book, if you could see it, and trying to embed these practices in what we're doing at Fidelity. And we created a continuous discovery and feedback program this past year in order to really embed the idea of continuous learning into a culture that is going through an agile transformation and had been previously very waterfall and very risk averse, obviously, because we are Fidelity and we have a brand to uphold. But these experts are going to help us dig into those provocative questions and talk about what continuous learning is and how we can unblock our cultures to make it work in the different types of organizations that we're in. So thank you for joining me. So this is the question we talked about last time. Is I'd love to have each of you tell us, what is continuous learning to you in your org and for your practice? So Subrashi, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So as you was showing the book, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to gift all of our employees so that we can become those people. Yeah, we haven't, I won't say that we have understood yet what continuous learning is, or we haven't yet become an expert on continuous learning, but we are continuously trying to learn more about that and making sure that we are at least moving in that direction. So as of now, we try to collect all data around NPS surveys, or talking with our users, or using those processes like jobs to be done. And again, like looking at what the users are actually doing in our product to make sure that we at least have a base on what the users are doing. And then we can then prioritize based on what the problems they are facing on a daily basis using our product, so that we can go in the direction of solving those problems or optimizing our solution, or making sure that the overall experience of our product for our users are getting better. But yeah, we have definitely not the expert yet in that domain.
It's very meta because you're continuously learning how to continuously learn. So, but I like the idea of bringing together, synthesizing multiple sources of data, different types of data in order to inform your next steps, which is really, what you're looking to do is step through it instead of coming up with a grand plan that you're going to execute on, that you're going to launch something in 18 months and then see if it works. So it seems like you're doing a great job of pulling those data sources together to inform decisions. How about you, Mark? How do you define it?
That's a really good question. I know the conference is, team focused, so I keep thinking about the team. And I think continuing learning is also getting people to see the aha moment, because UX is, there's always teams that are changing, and there's always a culture that you're constantly trying to move forward and get something out into the world for someone to use your product. But during that process, there needs to be continual learning about the value of user experience. And I think the only way you can do that is a couple ways. One is to actually, throughout the process, and I talk about this in my talk, that you involve developers, stakeholders, product owners in the actual research. So make sure you carve out time ahead of the sprint, ahead of the PI, involve everybody so they can actually watch the studies, participate. And then from that, there'll be learning opportunities because they're involved. They'll ask questions as well, and then they're involved in the process. And I think when you're involved in the process, then you have different aha moments. And then that could also lead to the opportunity to hold some possible roundtables and talk about more specific UX topics with your team and the group that you're working with. So there's a lot of doors that open with continuous learning. And I think definitely the data is important because you're collecting the information. It has to be valuable to pass forward, and there's a lot of process there. But I think it does boil down to the team, and that if you don't have a team that's fully engaged, then we probably all have products that we work with that we wonder, who worked on this? And I think it's because the team wasn't involved early on.
Yeah, it's one of the, tenets of good product, building highly functioning teams is that they can all agree on what the right problem is they're trying to solve, and how the solutions that they're creating are actually being, how they're resonating, and having people bear witness to that in person, to actually see it for themselves. Basically, the learning that you're creating is kind of like continuous empathy. It's really getting close to humans to understand the response to the things that you're building so that you together can make great decisions. Because what I see is teams that don't function well typically just don't agree. They don't agree on what problem they're solving. They don't agree on the solution that's been created. And unless they hear it from the horse's mouth, which would be the users and customers, it's hard for them to come to agreement on that. So that's amazing. You're actually building high functioning teams through this practice. And what about you, Ryan? What's the deal at Priceline?
Yeah, so, to me, continuous learning, it's just really being in tune with what your customers need and ultimately what will make them more successful. Customers need to change all the time, and we don't always know what our customers want. If we did, we would just be perfect, right? We would always have it right. So I think it's really paying attention to what the data is saying. That's qualitative and quantitative. I think there's also a big piece of this about trends and understanding what are the trends in your particular market and how could you use those trends to help create something useful, and also talking to your customer. I think that's certainly been a theme, but hearing directly from your customer what they need and what they like and what they don't like, it's really important. I think any smart brand, one way or another, is continuously learning. I think the bigger question is how do you adapt or adjust based on on what those things are. At Priceline, I think we really thrive on experimentation. The more we test, the more we learn. And these could be very simple, quick tests, or they could be large, complex initiatives, but you can still kind of experiment into those bigger ideas. But at the end of the day, you really need to make decisions based on what your customers need and make sure you're providing something that is just valuable and meaningful.
You mentioned a word that always becomes an issue, which is perfect, and perfection, which seems to sometimes get in the way of it. It kind of it doesn't interact well with the idea of continuous learning and getting to perfect. How does Priceline deal with that? Like, what is it about your culture where that seems to work well? It doesn't have to be perfect the first time, is what I think you all have realized. You're experimenting your way to a better reality for your customers.
Yeah, I mean, really, what I was saying there is if we knew what our customers wanted, then we would just be able to deliver it to them, right? And it would always be good and it would always be right. And it's just not the case. And I mean, we have a lot of different ways that we track and measure what we're testing, so that we can understand how something is performing. I don't think it's never going to be perfect, right? I don't think anything is ever going to be perfect, and that's because we don't know and things constantly change. But it's our job just to make sure it's as good as possible, and just by getting continuous feedback and really tracking how business is performing and understanding how customers feel, you get it as close to I hear you on perfect. You get it as close to perfect. You get it good enough, right? And but it doesn't stop there, right? Like you feel like something's good enough and keep on going with it, because it can, you can't always, there's a next step, there's a next move. I think a lot of the times, people who do a lot of testing have the mindset of this is good, it's working really well, it's done. It's kind of like stick it in a drawer, put it in a box, move on to the next thing. Where I think a better way to think of it is this is good, it's working really well. Maybe we could step away from this for a little bit, right? But again, like customers, things are going to change, right? People's needs are going to change. Let's come back to that thing that we know is working really good and figure out how to make it even better.
So there's a promise essentially that you're going to come back to it. Like it's not done.
It's not
Nothing's done.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything's done. I mean, I think projects continuously evolve, and what people are looking for changes and that evolves. And so it's not like you could just develop a feature, build something new, put in copy that works really good in that moment, because in another 2 weeks or a month, things could change, right?
Yeah,
And there might be
we could have a
something that's better at
pandemic.
that time.
Yeah, imagine
Pandemic's
that.
a perfect example. Yeah.
And I was just going to add, Jen, I introduce in my talk this idea of market ready product, that we have to get rid of MVP, this minimum viable product, this idea that we're going to give the minimum. And I think what we're talking about is that we're experimenting because we want to actually put something in their hands that they are going to enjoy, that's going to be pleasant. They're actually going to be able to complete the action they need to do. And I understand that that's an old term, MVP, that we've used that term for a long time. But if you think about it, who really wants the minimum of anything? So if we can keep pushing ourselves forward and thinking about what is something that would actually be ready for someone to use, not just the bare bones, but actually the features that will allow them to enjoy their day, because all products have competitors. So if I don't continually improve today, my competitor tomorrow is going to make that advancement. And so shooting for the minimum isn't really going to make you competitive. And I think we're talking about the same thing, where we're constantly trying to experiment and think about ways that we can improve. And the only way to do that is to step into the user's shoes and understand what their needs are. But that takes work.
Yeah, I like the idea of the MRP. And I've heard too, people, previously use minimum lovable product. But yeah, I think that MVP it's a definition that has been misinterpreted. It's been changed to mean what teams want it to mean or what companies want it to mean. And I'd love to dig into that more. Like, how do you know what an MRP, how do you know that it meets the criteria of MRP? Is that standardized criteria? Is it dependent on the project that you're working on? And Subrashi too, like, is there a concept like that at LexisNexis that you use? And is there data that you use to prove that out or predict market ready?
Yeah, we don't necessarily use that concept of like MVP or MRP, but we definitely try to use data to make sure that there is a need for that customer problem. And again, I guess like in previous talks also, as people were talking about it, that it's not really like there is a very important step of making sure that the business need meets with the user need. So of course we are going to solve user problem, but we'll also have to make sure that there is a business need for this, and that of course it requires a lot of data to make sure that we are getting to a solution for both of those problems.
And you mentioned you're using jobs to be done. Is that part of that, like really uncovering where the prioritized user needs are and value that can be brought to market?
Yeah, definitely. Like as I mentioned in my talk as well, that being a company like LexisNexis, where we have lots of different products, there is always chances that we can improve that, right? Or we can make enhancement, we can create new features, but to prioritize or to make sure that which one we need to work on for the first thing, we use jobs to be done. And we also use the other sources of data like NPS or surveys, and like we talk to the users and then try to come to a solution of like, this is the one we prioritize and this is the one we are going to go with.
And everyone agrees.
No,
right? It's magical. We have the data. So we all agree this is what we're going to do. I guess that's the other piece of it. The nuance to it is that there has to be an agreement in the organization. It's not always just going to be very crystal clear.
Exactly. And that's why I feel like combining all of these different sources of data helps a little bit, because if you're only saying that our users are asking us to build this and that's why we are building it, there will be lots of people saying that, no, that doesn't make sense. But even if there is like only surveys coming on and saying that some of the users are saying that, or even like, like if one source of data is telling us to do one thing, then that might not be the best solution to go with. But once you are combining different sources of data, you are kind of getting rid of the biases that are associated with one source of data. So hopefully we are going to a solution which makes more sense and which is more viable and which is going to solve a user problem.
Right. Awesome. So I wanted to ask about continuous learning for surfacing opportunities versus iterating on solutions. Are there certain methods that you use when you're trying to surface? Like, it sounds like jobs is something that LexisNexis is using. Are other people using jobs to surface good opportunities worth going after? And are there certain methods that you would use for going after like in-market improvements of things you're already offering? What's your toolkit? Ryan, do you have a toolkit?
I mean, I think it'd be a lot of different things. I think there's always a lot of problems to solve. I think the bigger challenge is prioritizing and figuring out what problems you should solve now, because it's going to have the biggest impact. And I think, different organizations solve this in a lot of different ways. It could be working with jobs. It could be a lot of it could be countless various things. Like, for example, a lot of companies have goals, and those goals come because there are KPIs that you need to hit, and you break those KPIs apart, and it turns into different outcomes and different outputs that you have to create. So I think there's really a lot of different ways to go about it. But I think kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think it's a balancing act, right? Of just really understanding what's needed and why. Like one good example that I've talked about in the past is, if you think about a Swiss Army knife, right? Like, you ask a customer early on and everything sounds great. They just need all these things, right? But then the product is out there and you realize all we really need is a blade and a saw. Like, no one really cares about the lighter and the toothpick and all these other things that go with it.
They care about the wine bottle opener, though. We can agree.
Yeah, that's true. That's wine bottle opener is important. So then then maybe it's like you're thinking about, how do I just make that a better wine opener, right? Because people aren't focusing on these other things. I think it's really easy to get caught up in like all the complexity and all the features, right? And really, if you're paying attention to what people are doing and just really like hearing them, right? Because again, people are going to say they want everything, right? So it's really like asking the right questions at the right times and listening to your data, and that will actually help you like be precise and really fine tune what it is that you should be working on, or identifying the right problem.
So it's truly mixed methods. You're gonna use the toolkit, what you need. Yeah. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, well, you bring up a great thing, and I always think of it this way, where you've got two questions. You're kind of at a crossroad, and it's am I building the right thing, or is the thing I built working? So you've kind of got this crossroads. So are you going to do generative research, where you're going to kind of go out and do some observations and try to understand what's the situation happening out there? And in that, I found many opportunities, things that I had no idea, because so many people had significant workarounds that even the administrator of the system had no idea people were doing these type of things. And you're like, that's an opportunity for a brand new product or feature. Yeah. Then you've got the other side, where you've got a prototype and you're building it, and you're going to do some usability testing, and you're really trying to fine tune something. So I think you've kind of got those two channels. And what I found in my career is doing research that there's value in both. It's going to depend on the organization and where they're at. You could be doing a very significant redesign of some software at one point, and that might be a really good idea to do some field research. And now things are opening up, so you may be able to actually go out there and sit behind somebody and watch them do their work. I mean, obviously you can still do that on Zoom, but you're going to be missing out on some of those, that cheat sheet that's hanging in their cube that has all the magical stuff that they're not going to show you. Those are the little artifacts that, UX nerds, we love that stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just walked away with a gold mine. So I think some of these techniques you can really come back with just tremendous amounts of innovation and opportunity.
Do any of you ever have a situation where someone thinks that what they're asking you to do is help make something better, but when you go in to do the research and the investigation, it turns out that exactly what Mark was just talking about, it's not about build the right thing or improve the right thing. We're actually stepping back into it's not build it right. What I mean is it's the right thing. It turns out it's just not the right thing, or it's not what people thought it was going to do, and it's not about tweaking it anymore. Like, how do you back up a team and say, like, if we can't fine tune this to work, to get the outcomes that we're seeking? How do you
I'll-
turn the conversation to one about like reinvention
Yeah, I'll
and
throw
innovation?
one little tidbit and I'll throw it to other speakers. But to me, it's the same thing from the beginning. It's, do you have an artifact? Were you able to record the situation? You know, most companies won't let you record, you know, video when you go and do an observation. You can only record audio. So maybe you might be able to do a screenshot if you're lucky, depending on what vertical or sector they're in. But bringing back that little piece of evidence, you're like a detective. You're going back with something to say, review this. This may change your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I was thinking about the data that's in the system as well.
Yeah, I just think about sometimes teams fall in love with their solutions, and it can be hard to hear that this isn't actually solving the problem that we thought it was. And we need to back up a little bit. And I wonder if that happens, like at LexisNexis, does that ever happen?
Yeah, I guess it happens all the time. And as I have like talked about in my presentation, we were trying to solve a very simple problem, apparently simple problem of printing or like emailing in our product, but it involved a solution that needs to be kind of comparable with the browser interaction as well. Because when you interact with a product in the browser, there is a component where you need to interact with the browser as well to get your documents or something downloaded in your system or emailed from your system. So we were dealing with that, and it's sometimes gets very I guess scary that is just a very simple solution of to be able to download, and if we are not able to provide that to our customers, then what does it mean for us, right? But I want to again like agree with Mark, as you were saying, like evidence and data is very important here. And again, that data can be from any source. It doesn't have to be only the usage data that you are getting from your customers. It can be again surveys, feedbacks, NPS data, or like just like looking at your user and seeing that what they are actually doing in the system. And then another thing is like art of pivoting. It's very easy to say, okay, let's forget about that solution and go back to the problem or go back to the drawing board and figure out the next solution. But yeah, like of course, if you are working on that project for like 3 months, 6 months, then how do you dissociate yourself from there and go back to the problem space? But yeah, I guess like working together and again convincing people with data that no, this is probably not the right solution, and it will probably cost us more, right, if we build a solution that's not correct for our users. So it's probably better to take a step back now and going back to the drawing board and trying to figure out a better solution.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, we're starting to get some questions. So I want to make sure we answer those questions that are coming in and awesome comments that are coming in through the chat. I would love to know, so blockers, like enablers and blockers, what enables us to work this way to help the organization? Are there like cultural signals, things that you look for in behaviors in the organization, types of leaders, types of technology? What are the enablements and the blockers that people should look for?
Okay. So I think enablers, it really does come down to culture. I think it's passion, enthusiasm, curiosity, I think is really important. I think having people know that it's okay to fail, right? Sometimes that's just really where you're going to learn. And I think, you know, if you have those things, I think your culture is probably headed in the right direction. I think in terms of blockers, you know, from my experience, and this is going to seem pretty broad, but from my experience, blockers usually come down to you know, time and money or resources, right? Or really, you know, that's really where I see blockers and have seen blockers in the past.
Mm-hmm. Time, money, and resources. It's always the Venn diagram.
Yeah.
You can have it fast, you can have it cheap, or you can have it right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What about you, Mark? Enablers and blockers that people should look for.
Just add a couple in there. I mean, I think there are the standard, but I think a couple others that you need to have a group of champions, folks that at your company that support what you're doing. And that could come from leadership. That also could come from some colleagues, some other groups. Look for the enthusiasts. Those will help you spread the word throughout those other groups when you're not there. And also there's a whole lot of research techniques, whether it's secondhand research or anything out there that other champions can do. So then they can bring you some of the more heavy hitter work that needs to get done. I think that's one. And then I think enablers, it's in the same vein as we were talking about before, is make sure that you open up, you could possibly open up UX office hours so you're available, so that if someone does have a question, they don't have to schedule a meeting with you. They can just come and bring something. There's a lot of validity to that. You can also, those roundtables are valuable where you're just spreading knowledge. Maybe you learned something on a particular study that because you're in a silo, another group may benefit from. So you could do a session on what I just learned, or maybe it's another high level topic. So I think as long as you're open, that does help. And then finding others to join in will then continually create this aura of user experience happiness.
Do you have, speaking of roundtables and like, do you have a scaffolding for that? Like, do you have that every month where you're bringing insights to the organization that are surfacing and anyone can come and listen?
Yeah, I would say quarterly if you can, because it does take time to put together something that is worthwhile attending, because you do want someone to walk away with a lesson or get them involved. So if you could at least do it quarterly, I think that would be a good schedule.
Awesome. And Subrashi, what about you? Like thinking of enablers and blockers?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Ryan and Mark has said. But another thing I want to say is that people who are willing to, and it might sound controversial, but people who are not willing to fall into the line, and that I especially see in LexisNexis because it's a legacy organization, right? Like we have been there forever. So there are people who are working with us for 20, 30, 40 years. And if you sometime, not I don't want to say everybody, but sometime if you want to talk to them on trying something new, there's a pushback on like, no, it's going well. Why do you want to try something new? Or why do you want to go in a different way? So people who willing to, I guess, think outside the box a little bit and be willing to try something new is also very important to push that organization in a different direction or in a better direction. And so these are probably the blockers, but yeah, like culture wise, it's very important to have people who are willing to try out new things. And as like everything Mark and Ryan mentioned, people who are ready to experiment, people are ready to fail fast so that they can try something new.
So we have a question here that I think you can answer. I think all three of you can answer it, but it reminds me, it segues right into what you were saying. Is there a way for people to unlearn old habits that prevent them from believing in continuous learning and supporting it? Have any of you had to do that and seen it work?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have to do that every day, right? Because we are always, as human beings, set on our ways of doing things. And I was reading something about the idea of divergent thinking versus convergent thinking. I think that can be very beneficial while we are trying to solve a problem, because again, as human being, we try to jump to the solution very quickly. But if you want to take a moment just to think that this is the problem space, this is what the customer problem is, and this is what I need to solve, and then go from there, because we are always like, oh, I need what the customers want. Like, we need to create that, we need to change that, we need to update that. But just maybe take a moment, and that's not only for yourself, but the entire team involved in working of that project or that like product or feature, that let's just take a step back and try to think about the problem for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like something that needs to be agreed upon. It's kind of like a working agreement that there's an opportunity space, problem space, and there's solution space. And it gives us the time and the dedication to actually unearth the root causes of the true unmet need. And then because we're calling out that there's a solution space, it means that we're going to diverge and think about many ways to solve the problem. And I think that's like a big piece of the enabler, an organization who says, yes, I agree with that. We put that on paper, we put that on screens, and that's the way we work.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Jen, I think on that note, like a methodology, like the 5 whys, or even a usability test where you're talking with someone one-on-one instead of a big group. It's actually using the specific methodology to think a different way, what you will actually come out the other side with different ideas, because we all seem to grapple to the same concepts every day. And if we can push ourselves to think, trying one of these methods, because it pushes you to diverge or converge, you can actually come out the other side, and that can actually change the way you think.
So that makes me think of something else. There's another question here. It says, in organizations that have a hierarchical structure and the directors, VPs, C-level are multiple levels separated from the user, how do you get them to take time out of their busy schedules to observe the users? I've noticed that, like, our president of personal investing, she, on her way to work every morning, she would listen to calls with our customers. So she's like already absorbing and empathizing and being open to like bold experimentation for how to like solve for these problems that are very heartfelt. And like, so she made a dedication to doing that. But how do you guys expose your leaders to your users, your end users? What are techniques?
So, I mean, I would say now they are very much engaged. It's not really something I have to live, right? But I have been in situations in the past where it's not really the case. And I think there's a few things. I think, when you talk to your customers, it's, you're on a platform, you're recording it, having those conversations. I think when people actually hear what their customers are saying, it's kind of like a game changer. It's probably one of the best way to get an executive's attention is to say, check out this video. This is what one of your customers just said about their experience, right? Mm-hmm. And it's powerful, and and it really works. And when you're able to couple that with data and benchmarks, it becomes even more powerful. So it's not only that's what this person said, it's that's what this person said, and these are the KPIs we should be striving for, right? And when you start to pair these things together, it really does lead to an impactful message.
Do you do that proactively, or is that only on demand? Like, is it you're proactively surfacing these feelings and the recordings and the data? This question's for all of you. Like we talked about Mark having the round table, like where every quarter. So yeah. What methods have you found for pushing things out? Like, for instance, we have a Yammer channel at Fidelity, and I've really wanted to have an insights channel on Yammer so that we're continuously putting stuff out there for everyone to see in the Fidelity community. Do you have channels like that you've created in your environments, in your companies?
There have been channels like that. I think the challenge is that, as you said earlier, you're talking about individuals that are really busy. So if you can figure out a way, the video is good. I've also done, for example, the instant replay on a site. You've got, companies like Tea Leaf and ClickTail and Hotjar. There's a whole list of them. You can go down the list.
Content Square, yeah.
Yeah, if you can replay sessions that there was some issue that you isolated, it's amazing. Not only just a usability test, but being able to view and see, that's helpful. And then in those sessions, yes, I think you still need to figure out a way to summarize it, because the raw data is just, it's like a fire hose. So yeah. if there's a way you can summarize it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually agree. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, there are some great tools out there, for scroll maps and user recordings, and I 100% those tell a great story, and they do have an impact for sure.
Yeah, and I think the storytelling capability, Subrashi, you're doing that with data, which is amazing. Our UX leaders are doing that as well, pulling in data from folks like yourself, and also from, in conversations with users. I think storytelling is one of the most critical skills for us to get the impact that we're looking for from the learnings that we're getting.
Yeah, as Ryan was saying, that we also like to do that in our company, that combining that what and why. So yes. If one user is saying something, let's see that if that's true for all the other users in our for that particular feature or product as well. So that tells a very compelling story of combining that why, what with why.
I love the what plus why. And so we have run out of time and I think we could talk for days about this, but I wanted to thank Ryan, Subrashi, and Mark. This is awesome. You guys are leading, charting the course for helping people learn continuously. So thank you so much.